Well, hello, folks. How you doing? Yeah, the other video yesterday was a bit of a long, disappointing complaint, but I had to do it. Um, so anyway, probably no one will watch it anyhow, so it doesn't matter. I wanted to uh, give a shout out to a blog that I've been following for quite a while, since about 2011, I guess. Um, Before I do that, I'll just talk about pedagogy or pedagogy, however you want to say it. I lived and worked in several countries around the world, and being an expat, working abroad kind of thing, I've met a lot of English teachers and academics and people working at universities and diplomats and engineers and finance people, all kinds of folks. And everybody's pretty damn smart, or they probably wouldn't be doing the jobs that they do. For example, I've known a lot of really intelligent English teachers. They have an education in English, undergraduate degree. They probably have a graduate degree in education. They have a graduate degree in English of some sort or another. They know what they're doing. They know their subject well. They work at universities or language schools, companies, and so on. And when I was younger in Japan, I did that for a while as well. But I'm not an expert. What's your pedagogy? I'm a film guy. Went to film school. Okay, you're hired. Because there was a big demand for native speakers. So you're teaching English as a native speaker. So you could get a gig, and you need a gig. And it paid pretty good. But you learn as you go how to teach something. Uh, you know English, but it's not your thing. Explaining all the grammar and everything in fine detail, diagramming sentences and discussing syntax and everything like that. Maybe not your thing. But, people want to learn how to speak English, so they don't really need to delve into that necessarily. Or maybe they have already in school, so they just want to know how to have a conversation. So, conversation teacher. Anyway, that's all great. But most of us, I think, whatever our area of expertise is, are fairly confident that because we're smart in one domain, we're smart in a lot of domains. Because we've read a news article or watched something on YouTube or back in the day on the news, or we read Economist magazine or Business Week back in the day, something like that. So we're familiar with stuff and we have a vocabulary, but we don't know the details or the complexities within the details. Like I've known a lot of airline mechanics and engineers, and I couldn't tell you anything about the various systems involved with a passenger jet. You have electronics, you have mechanics of all sorts, aerodynamics, aeronautics. It's so deep, right? And I'm sure within that team of people, they have experts that focus on certain areas. Just like in filmmaking, you have a cinematography or a photography team, right? And you have grips and gaffers, people who deal with electronics, people who deal with equipment, people who deal with data nowadays because we have digital cameras and so on. People who deal with finance, with payroll, with feeding people, actors who have their own specialized skills and abilities, designers, you go on and on. And I think most areas where you're looking at a level of complexity that's fairly high, you have various groups of people who have expertise in their particular area, and they're all working together as a coordinated team to get the job done. But in conversations at the pub or cafe, we tend to overestimate our intelligence. Maybe not our intelligence. Maybe you really are intelligent. You know exactly how intelligent you are. But maybe it's our knowledge, right? We're not epistemically humble. Um, so we tend to get emotional about certain things that we're attached to and identify with without thinking them through. And I think that everything that we're not getting in terms of the forest for the trees problem is due to complexity. Things are complex. So if you're going to talk about nuclear power or energy grids or political systems, sociology, culture, these things are high order complexity, right? It's not just the nuclear power plant that's complex. The whole damn thing is complex. The way the universe works is complex. And uh, different ways of practicing science to find out how it works is complex. We have more complex tools than we ever had before. There was this big scandal in Singapore where some company down there sent some chips up through Malaysia, might get to China, and we have a ban on sending uh, complex, NVIDIA chips and so on to China. It's not as if China can't make chips. They will figure it out. And it's kind of funny because if you want to play the game that way and not compete directly, but try to, hobble your competition one way or another, it still requires a lot of investment and energy to do that. And you're telling your competitor, get better, figure it out. And the next day, the guy comes along and he wipes the floor with your ass because you motivated him to get better at what he does. And so, well, competition works that way sometimes. Um, so the complexity is a thing that we sweep under the rug. We don't want to deal with it. So we come up with other constructs and stories about consciousness, about God, about nature, about all kinds of things. And in reality, these are just stories. And the physics is complex. We can't go there. You're not going to tell me how my camera works unless you're an expert. You're not going to tell me how yeah, you just can't do it, right? Because you don't know. So most of the stories we encounter every day are very superficial, especially if you're a telly watcher. They just don't go into detail enough or into the nuances to have any explanatory worth whatsoever. So, yeah, you're a Putin fan or a stooge if you say that wars and invasions happen and for complex reasons, and there's a chain of events in place usually, and conditions, preconditions uh, in place, and corruption and other things that are there that help to lead to the action of the enemy, right? They don't just wake up one morning and do something. So Putin made some big mistakes when he invaded. A lot of generals got killed. It didn't work out so well, right? And I think because he's such a powerful man, he wasn't listening. That's the theory, to his military people. But that's changed over time. Anyway, you think maybe that Americans are much, much smarter than everybody else just because you're an American, or maybe you're from New Zealand or Australia or England or France or Germany. And so your people are smarter than everybody else. But that's not true if you think about it. A lot of times people are operating within structures and systems that don't bring out the best in them, And that's not to say it's all conspiratorial. You have to mind your straw man arguments against critiques of capitalism or social criticism or things like that, because there's a vast literature about this out there, and there has been for hundreds of years. And so uh, people have thought seriously about these issues. And just because you think you like the way things are doesn't mean that they're perfect or that they don't warrant critique. And, but anyway, that happens quite a lot. People want to defend their beliefs and so on. But, physics is more complex than a lot of things. How the world works, and I'm not talking about Newtonian physics, but you can go to quantum mechanics and other domains within physics. But in general, talking about electrons and neutrons and the whole decision tree, quote unquote, a loose definition of decision, like why do these elements behave the way they do? Why does a river flow the way it flows? And when a river stops being a river and becomes a lake, it's something else. Why did that happen? In the topography of the river and the law of gravity and all these things. You know, an ant is a more complex thing than a rock. You can look at the complexity, the internal complexity of a rock and an ant and see that they're different. Orders of magnitude more complex. But it doesn't mean that the decisions an ant makes for whatever reasons, stimulus and response, or that a human makes is somehow disembodied, ethereal, magical. We're embedded in reality, and reality is physics, the physical world, and how it works. And so trying to understand our energy policy or something, we'd have to take these things into account. And we could agree on what's real and what matters, and then we could base our decisions, science-based or reality-based decisions, on our knowledge of how things work, and we could proceed from there. But there are other motivations, other incentives that put a stop to our thinking that way and behaving that way. Human beings are emotional, and we're highly complex creatures, obviously. But our life is embedded in reality, in physics, and nothing's going to change that. So imagining it's not so doesn't make it so, unfortunately. So nobody's going to be flying like Superman anytime soon. And if they do, they're going to be using some mechanical thing like an airplane to do it. Anyhow, this guy, Tom Murphy, he has a blog called Do the Math, ucsandiego.edu. He's somebody who sees reality, in my opinion. So he's using physics and estimation to assess energy growth options. So about the blog, I'll just read this to you because I want you to read this blog. And this is his description from 2024. This blog has changed a lot since its inception in 2011 because its author has changed a lot. The classic content in quantitative-oriented assessing energy and growth on a finite planet posts often took the form of poking holes in technological fantasies, coming to the conclusion that keeping the juggernaut going would be easier said than done. Due to the unsettling nature of that conclusion, I shifted my efforts and blog focus to ways we could trim substantial resource usage from our lives. A degrowth type of thing, but a managed one, a reasonable one. And nobody's going to talk about that, verboten. Based on my own journey, it seemed that we all had the power to make enormous changes at the flip of a switch, literally in some cases. From 2015 to 2021, my activity on Do the Math slowed to a near standstill. I was both intensely busy, but also blah, blah, blah. I toyed with the idea of changing the website name to Did the Math. Ooh. Once shedding a heavy administrative role, I resumed teaching a general education course on energy and the environment, deciding to create my own textbook, as those on offer did not pack enough punch for my taste. As I was wrapping up the textbook project in 2021, lots of detail to attend, I began trying to piece it all together, which led to the epilogue and some musings and appendices. Time to revive, do the math, to explore this further. So anyway, you know, what he's done is amazing, and you can actually get the textbook from UC San Diego in PDF form. And it's called Energy and Human Ambitions on a Finite Planet. I've posted that several times at Globe Hackers Facebook page, and it's free. So Energy on a Finite Planet, preface, how to use the book, appendices, bibliography. It's extremely detailed, and it's a fantastic resource. And it's unfortunate that more of us don't take the opportunity to take advantage of these resources. It really is, because it would allow us to focus on things that matter, to focus on things we could accomplish and achieve within the constraints of physical reality, right? Physics. Obviously, society and culture is even more complex, right? And it's hard to shift that, but that's somebody else's blog that I follow. But this is amazing. I really wish everybody would follow this guy and read everything that he's ever written. So some of the titles are The Game of Life, and this was in 2024. And another one is Mysterious Materialism, which is very interesting for people who are interested in philosophy, but also in physics. And Human Supremacy, which is the one that I was thinking about today. So he uses the term, as do some of the people I follow, metastatic modernity. And he has a video series that he's going to put up about it. So this is the 12th of 18 installments in Metastatic Modernity video series. He does want to rile up folks, but some of that may be unavoidable. It's something we must face and understand, modernity. It's a big topic, and of course it depends on how you define and use the term modernity. But anyway, it's all embedded in a bigger picture that's has to do with anthropology and anthropocentrism and all that kind of thing. Human exceptionalism conjures for me as an American anyway, the notion of American exceptionalism. And that's an interesting subject in and of itself. I've posted a lot on that and some books on that subject. But this is an interesting series that I think everyone should watch. So one thing I wanted to read from his post called Decisions. Okay, I'm going to read the opening bit of Decisions by Tom Murphy, and then scroll through and look at some of the highlighted bits, and then leave the rest to you. In my continuing pursuit of humanity, as an antidote to modernity's human supremacy illness, the atoms that constitute who I am take issue with lofty and self-aggrandizing concepts of idealism, dualism, and free will, replaced by the unflattering material world and its staggering wealth of emergent complexity. I have argued that opposite of lacking imagination and being reductionist, such a view far exceeds our imaginative capacity and is in fact rather expansive and open-ended, next to the facile, shortcut cop-outs that sweep mind-boggling complexity under the rug by pretending that constructs like mind, consciousness, soul, God, or Santa Claus are real. And this is part of the dualism thing, right? Mind is a magical thing outside of your brain and body, and so on. Consciousness, the universe is conscious. There's a magical quality to it, the soul, all of that. So one stubborn sticking point is beguiling illusion that we are separate from our corporeal bodies, owning and controlling them somehow. This notion is prevalent, despite zero evidence that we are anything but corporeal, and heaps of evidence to the contrary. A less supremacist variant allows that all life, down to microbes, are endowed with this material override to exert control and autonomy over their environments, but still demand a line of separation between life and inanimate collections of matter. An amoeba suddenly changing course in relation to its environment is, in this view, ontologically different than a hurricane changing course in reaction to its environment. Granted, life is amazing and exhibits unambiguous behavioral differences compared to, say, rocks. Hint, check the complexity of internal structure. Decisions are carried out at every level from electrons to ants, but are at no point fundamentally operating on a different basis. Depending on how one defines decisions, and I'm not talking about decision theory per se, or decision theory in the context of game theory and physics, or things like that, but just why a thing does a thing. So either electrons and bats carry them out by the same rules, or neither can be said to be making free decisions. Whatever the case, electrons and bats are on a similar footing when it comes to decisions, albeit at a vastly different scale of complexity. Given enough information and background, the decisions by either are not surprising, even if not precisely predictable. And we're thinking about a deterministic universe here. Now, I do identify a difference between living decisions and inanimate decisions, importantly, but it's a subtle one that I'll wind my way towards. So this is very interesting, this subtle difference between decisions of animate and inanimate things. Stimulus response, right? The basic. Whether discussing individual electrons, amoebas, or newts, we might characterize the decision process as being centered on stimulus response to varying degrees of complexity. Excuse me. My premise is that they are arranged on a continuum of complexity, but nowhere break away to operate outside of the laws of physics, staged on a material plane, following the unscripted script the universe writes in real time. So the universe does what it does according to its laws, nature's laws, great nature, as I always put it. And we're all kind of in that, and we're stuck with it. It is what it is, which is a sad way to put it, but it is what it is, and the laws within it operate on hubristic human beings as well as all these other things in the universe. Inanimate decisions, and he looks at this Newton's cradle thing and discusses how that works a little bit, which is, these are always cool. It's a simple matter of stimulus, simultaneous adherence to conservation of energy and conservation of momentum. So magical decision making. Here, magical means without a brain, which we dumbly and self-centeredly assume is necessary for making decisions. So human decision-making process, like in game theory or whatever, We need a brain for it, folks. But this is going to do what it does based on conservation of momentum and so on. That's also interesting. He's such an interesting storyteller. And for that matter, it's the same as water vapor in the room's air finding your ice drink glass and collecting on the outside. Wherever it's cold, meaning reduced jostling, the atoms are not as, jostled about, things will be jostled into such places, and once there are not jostled out against, and once they are not jostled out again. The general term is condensation. Related phenomenon can account for concentrations of ores, fossil fuels, etc. So all of this, like how long does it take for a living matter to be compressed, and how much compressed for how long to turn into, oil, crude oil, stuff like that. And then how much of that crude oil do we need to extract it and so on. So he's always talking about things like that from various perspectives. And it's important to understand this because there won't be any green transition. That's a fantasy. That's another topic. Anyway, at its most basic level, one might ask how an electron decides where to go next. So it of course depends on the positions, velocities, and spin orientations of all the other particles in the universe. Even though it executes a decisive path, it fundamentally has no other choice. Now imagine, if you can, and no one really can, the same sort of mandates applied to complex systems all the way up to thoughts. Some folks seem to believe that thoughts and ideas are not material in nature, but holy cow, just try to have a thought without complete material dependence. So you can stop eating now and start starving, and after a while, your thinking is going to be impaired big time. You need energy to run your brain, and these are all material things, folks, whether it's an apple or a steak. Talks about border cases. Yeah, this is interesting. Before we get to living decisions, it's worth a brief stop at seeds and spores. These can't be called inanimate per se, as they are stages of life, intricately structured material containing DNA and everything. And all of the references, hyperlinks are always interesting too, right? That might remain completely inert for tens of thousands of years in the case of seeds and hundreds of millions of years for spores. Metabolism is completely stopped. So people often talk about what it's like to be knocked out or under general anesthesia, how bizarre that is. No processes are transpiring inside. It's just waiting, dormant. It may ultimately decide, in quotes, to spring into action, but that decision is not taking place in the interior. The organism is really just off and operating indistinguishable from dead. When our outer surface senses appropriate conditions, moisture, nutrients, it may reanimate. But what is the nature of this decision if the structure is completely static and inert? What aspect of life is making this decision? What is the stimulus-response pair? It's all freaking interesting. Life's different. The key, I believe, to what makes an ant's decisions differ from a rock's or an electron's is feedback, a closed loop. An ant's decisions bear on its ability to stay alive, facilitate reproduction, and remain an ant. An ant incapable of making life-sustaining decisions can't be an ant. Conversely, a hurricane may decide to veer, but this decision is not part of a closed loop that determines whether the hurricane can pass on its genetic code and propagate hurricanes into the future. The very setup of life in an evolutionary ecological context forces the kinds of decisions that enable the whole process to persist. So key between life and inanimate, right? So life depends on life. Life begets life, and it's these closed loop feedbacks that are really important. And we just can't exist without all of it, the animate and inanimate. We are biological creatures of Earth, and we need to understand the whole picture, or we know nothing. We're not even trying to learn anything. And all the nonsense that you see on TV about politics and culture wars and transsexual swim meets and whatever, that's practically just nonsense entertainment. I mean, it's just a diversion, a pastime, compared to learning about nature, because nature will tell you everything you need to know about how to live as human beings embedded in these complex emergent living systems, and wanting to do things that are fit for posterity. In other words, for your offspring, because you procreate. You're not a hurricane. The truism is that it is what it is. Stands as a decent representative of unassailable circular logic. The universe contains something rather than nothing because it does, and without pausing to ask our permission. So sometimes circular logic is good, but it gets a bad rap. I'm going to read this because it's very interesting, because people will often say, especially in the context of debates between religious apologists and philosophers, that, you're committing a logical fallacy or it's circular reasoning or something. But it has its place. At its core, I believe the circular objection to be yet another expression of human supremacy. Just as our culture discounts the problem-solving acumen of early microbial life because they cheated and didn't solve the toughest problems in the world with brains, we eschew circular reasoning because it highlights a sort of truth that is not of cerebral origin. We can't take credit for it, therefore it doesn't count. So another aspect of homo hubris, right? We have to be at the center of everything. Otherwise, it doesn't exist. I'll just close my eyes in the forest and it doesn't exist. Yeah, you could do some version of Carl Sagan. Never mind the fact that amoebas and their genius kin have solved problems that baffle our best brains to this day, to the point that we are utterly incapable of conjuring even the simplest of its tricks using our neurons, without simply parroting our smarter microbe teachers. The same kind of protest arises in adjacent realms, such as the common reaction to determinism. If I can't drive the train, then what's the point? I refuse to ride along. Similarly, it comes up with, and I think this is a kind of similar idea that Uncle Sam has about everything in the world. Similarly, it comes up in discussions of free will. I can make free choices. Free of what? Physics? Because I'm a separate entity in control. Discussions of mind or consciousness produce a related reaction. Mind, consciousness, essentially soul, really exist, independent of, or at least alongside, the material plane. Stephen Jay Gould, overlapping magisteria, all that kind of non-overlapping magisteria, in a scary sort of dualism. And in this case, cultural reasoning doesn't count as proper thinking because it removes the motivating agent, human mind, from the argument. Gee, that sounds like the actual universe as it exists, going about its amazing business well before the recent addition of cerebral life. I'm more than okay with that. So we're a very recent addition of cerebral life in this living world where maybe the origins of life go back 4 billion years or something like that. It's just like, and here we are suddenly because of all kinds of bizarre circumstances, random yet determined, and we think we're so damn smart. Circling back to where we were before our digression, I propose that life must make sort of decisions that are necessary to maintain life in a tidy tautology. A river decides to flow downhill. Gravity and topography play key roles. But if, for whatever reason, it was prevented from doing so, then it would no longer be a river, would it? Maybe a lake. If a sudden logjam blocks a river from its normal course, it might decide to erode a bank, topple some trees, and form a new channel. That's what a river deciding to remain a river. That's a river deciding to remain a river. He talks about stalactites on cave ceilings, a split of sand like this one, and so on, and how they become the way they are. And that's quote unquote decisions. And those are all determined by the laws of physics. Yes, physics absolutely guides the decisions, as in all cases. And he looks at snowflakes, which is interesting, and then back to life. It's possible that these examples seem trivial, circular, pointless, or lacking a there. But I contend that an essential truth is contained in the self-consistency of each. If life had not availed itself of mechanisms to assist in securing the essential nutrients and resources to facilitate its self-replication, then it wouldn't be life. The mechanisms may be too complex for us to grasp using puny meat brains, being based on neurological mechanisms selected for different purposes. But the seed or spore provide a window into the stripped-down form of decision-making that more evidently comes down to a mechanical process, rather than some ethereal higher plane assessment, since the interior is completely inactive and not participatory. Life makes decisions because decisions make life. Rivers flow because failing to do so would terminate their status as a river. They might become a lake, or, Lake Powell, because there's a dam there. Somebody built a big wall to keep the water from flowing. Every action in the universe, down to the motion of an electron, can be cast as a decision, always based on simultaneous assessment of many factors, stimuli, and always obeying the laws of physics. Nothing has any freedom to do otherwise. Just because our brains are incapable of tracking the complexity of the mechanisms that lead to decisions at the level of life does not invalidate the basis. How grandiose to imagine that we have a say in the matter. For me, this perspective only serves to enhance appreciation for life. It serves humility. It places me deep within the tangle of the material universe in all its diversity. It connects me intimately to every living and non-living entity, which is the way of things, whether I'm ready to acknowledge it or not. Reality is complex, and our reality has a lot of emergent complex emergent qualities to it that you can put in various different domains that probably lie outside your pedagogy or area of expertise. But it's good to have this perspective, because then we can see the forest for the trees, and we can be less emotionally perturbed by all the trite, simplistic nonsense that flood into our brains on a daily basis. I fantasize about a world where people understand nature better than most of us do today and are therefore better people. It's like the awe of nature, not Spinoza's God, not Carl Sagan, but, people who just are amazed that they can learn anything anyway and want to keep learning and want to understand how things work, and are less distracted and agitated by the arrogant, imaginings and beliefs that we base everything on in our culture. I mean, I guess I've always wanted to see a culture that was more reality-based, science-based. I'm not talking about scientism, as I always say. It's not about that. It's about using the tools that we can access as human beings to better understand how things work and to make better decisions. Therefore, to make better decisions, to have agency, you know, to be able, as Noam Chomsky says, act as if we have agency because we actually know something about how things work. And I don't think we can make good decisions based on just bullshit stories. That's why I always make the distinction between, theories of this or that, conspiracy, an actual conspiracy, criminal conspiracy or not, conspiring to take over the whatever, but and conspiracy stories, which are just mostly bullshit that people believe, or a conspiracy theory that has some evidence behind it. So they released all the Kennedy papers, and commentators so far are saying there was lots of information about the CIA in there. But the rest of it is pretty much Warren Report. Oswald killed Kennedy, not much evidence that there were other shooters there. But they ask a critical question, a crucial question, which is, if the CIA had done their job, they would have stopped Oswald before he could kill Kennedy. And there's so much evidence for that alone. It's mind-boggling. So they were watching him and following him and bugging places he was for forever. And the fact that they couldn't find a criminal conspiracy, Oswald, for example, conspiring, even if he's a lone wolf, he did it all by himself and had no help whatsoever. They knew about the guy. Why didn't they stop him? So that's a question I can't answer, but why didn't they stop him? And it leads up to 911 as well, because the misconnect between FBI and CIA efforts when they were tracking these people from Saudi Arabia who later flew the airplanes into the Twin Towers and other places, other targets. And why couldn't they stop them? Is it just incompetency and corruption and accidents piling up on top of accidents and so on? It doesn't have to be an organized, orchestrated conspiracy from the top down to be a structurally and systemic fuck up that sheds a very negative light on the whole picture, right? The whole system. And that maybe there are incentives sometimes for powerful people to not notice certain things because it doesn't behoove them to. It doesn't help their careers. It doesn't keep them in a position of power or protect their job, right? So, these questions are complex and difficult to get at, and there are all kinds of barriers to trying to understand them because people are defending their positions in the system, and they don't want to unpack it in great detail because that would lead to perhaps changing the structure of the system to such a degree that, it could threaten their whole worldview, way of life, belief systems, and so on. So I think we're just going the wrong direction. We're not willing to look at reality. We don't want to. We're stubbornly, willfully, and passionately ignorant of things, and it's unfortunate. Even critics of things that I follow have these biases, and they still want to defend certain things despite the wealth of information that criticizes these things in extremely effective ways and with lots of references and lines of evidence to support them. but they don't want to look at it for one reason or another. That's okay. I'm just asking people to consider that they have a lot to learn and to not stop learning. There are good sources of information all over the place we can access. This book by Tom Murphy is free, and you can read it, and I think you should. But anyway, a lot of people don't have time to do that kind of reading, which I understand. But if you're watching this, you're probably the kind of person that might entertain doing that. So anyway, yeah, decisions, decisions. I hope you'll read that piece at Do the Math called Decisions, Decisions, and also download Tom Murphy's textbook. Take good care. Have a nice day, a nice weekend. Buliam T out.